This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
When you hear the name Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, you probably picture, the absolute peak of abstract reason.
Oh, absolutely. A philosophical system so dense it just feels like it was designed to crush everything, including religion, under the weight of pure logic.
Exactly. That German idealism Kant, Fichte, Hegel was basically the triumph of secular thought, right?
Yeah.
God gets filed away under interesting historical idea.
That's the default story. But the sources we've been digging into, well, they paint a completely different picture. A much more dramatic one, actually.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. What if that whole elaborate philosophical fortress, what if it wasn't built to destroy theology, but to desperately, and I mean desperately, try to save it?
You've hit it exactly. What if this was a rearguard action, a desperate attempt to shield Christian faith from, well, everything, from science, from the French Revolution, from the Enlightenment itself?
Which brings us to the central tragedy of Hegel's life. Here's a guy who builds his entire system on Christian foundations, and how is he rewarded? He's attacked his whole life as an atheist, a blasphemer.
It's an incredible irony. So today, that's how we're going to unpack it. We're going to look at German idealism as a sequence of survival strategies, you could almost call them, God's defense strategies.
Okay, so let's start with the blueprint of this fortress. Hegel's masterwork, the Encyclopedia, is split into three huge parts: logic, philosophy of nature, and philosophy of spirit. And you're saying this isn't just an arbitrary outline?
Not at all. It's a deliberate theological echo. Once you see the parallel, the whole system just snaps into focus. It maps almost perfectly onto Augustine's City of God.
Augustine's City of God. How does that work structurally?
Well, think about Augustine's structure. You have the heavenly city, the earthly city, and then the whole arc of salvation history that connects them.
Okay.
Hegel just translates that. The logic, his part on pure, timeless thought, that's the heavenly city. The philosophy of nature, which is all about being thrown out into the messy material world.
That's the earthly city. I see it now.
Exactly. And the philosophy of spirit, which traces consciousness waking up through history. That's his version of salvation history. It's the spirit finding its way home.
Wow. So he wasn't just referencing Christianity. He was literally using the blueprints from one of the church's greatest thinkers to build his defense.
He had to. And the starting point, logic, that wasn't just a random philosophical choice either. He felt he had no other option.
Why not?
Because he was directly translating the opening of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, the Logos.
The Logos, right.
For Hegel, in the New Age of Reason, you couldn't just accept the Logos mystically anymore. It had to be understood. It had to be given a rational structure. So the Word of God,
right,
it became the logic. That was his first brilliant defensive move.
That's fascinating. And it goes deeper than just the structure. The sources suggest he was embedding secret codes, almost, using symbolic numbers from Christian tradition.
Yes, he was very careful. He hated how arbitrary systems like Kant's seemed, with his, 12 categories. Hegel avoided that, but he secretly wove in numbers that had deep theological meaning.
Okay, give me an example.
The number 343. The thinking is that this was the number of concepts he intended for the logic section.
343. It seems so specific.
It's 7 times 7 times 7. 7 is the number of completion, of perfection, in Christian symbolism, cubing it. Well, that's a Trinitarian, a triply divine completion. The system's skeleton is basically whispering, I'm built on the Trinity.
A theological skeleton hiding inside a rationalist body. And there's another number, right, 373, which symbolizes the outer wall.
Precisely. 373 is a prime number. What does that mean? It means it's indivisible. It's a signal that the entire encyclopedia logic, nature, spirit, is a single closed system. You can't update it. You can't break it apart. Any attempt to do so would shatter the whole thing.
Okay, so you have this incredibly careful architect building a fortress to protect Christian belief. And yet, the tragedy is that he gets hammered for it, branded an atheist. How did a project like this go so wrong in public?
It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? He was caught in a crossfire from every possible direction and for completely opposite reasons.
Let's walk through them. First up, the conservative Protestant theologians.
Right. They looked at his system, they saw logic sitting at the very top, above traditional theology, and they just freaked out. To them, he was replacing God with philosophy.
Then you had the political conservatives, the reactionaries. They attacked him for the opposite reason.
They called him a pantheist. They saw his idea of spirit unfolding in history, and they thought he was dissolving God into just the historical process. God wasn't above history anymore. He was just
Yeah.
Everything. Which to them was the same as being nothing.
And then from the left, you get the radicals, the future Marxists.
And they accused him of being a reactionary. They said he was divinizing the state, using this whole system to prop up the Prussian monarchy.
So no one was happy. Theologians, conservatives, radicals. And then a century later, the analytic philosophers just dismissed the whole thing as nonsense.
Meaningless sentences was the charge. They completely missed the entire theological game he was playing. The core problem, the reason for all this resentment, was his language.
His choice to translate theological terms into philosophical ones.
Exactly. He didn't say God, he said absolute spirit. He didn't say creation, he said externalization. Or in German, Entäußerung.
Okay, let's pause on that one. Entäußerung, that sounds cold, mechanical. It's not just creation, is it?
It's so much deeper. It actually means self-emptying. It's the philosophical equivalent of the incarnation. God becoming flesh, becoming other than himself. It's a moment of incredible vulnerability. But by calling it Entäußerung, he protected it from scientific attack, but...
And he also stripped it of all its religious warmth.
And to the theologians, that looked like a hostile takeover. It looked like philosophy was storming the castle and renaming all their most sacred treasures.
Okay, so let's zoom out. We're calling this a theological survival strategy. Hegel's fortress is the final stage. But let's trace how he got there. Let's start with Kant.
Right. By the late 1700s, traditional faith is getting battered. You have Newton's physics, Voltaire's critiques, political revolution. The whole foundation is crumbling. Someone had to do something.
And Kant's strategy is what we're calling the country house. What does that mean?
Well, Kant was smart enough to know that God couldn't survive in the main hall of pure reason anymore. Science would just tear it apart. So he did something clever. He moved God into a separate wing of the house.
Practical reason.
Practical reason. God becomes a necessary postulate for morality. He's safe, he's protected, but he's also completely isolated from the world of facts and science.
Which seems like a good compromise. But it wasn't enough for the next guy, Johann Gottlieb Fichte.
For Fichte, Kant's solution was way too passive. This was the era of Napoleon. You couldn't just hide. So Fichte adopts the underground shelter strategy.
Fighting God, not in a separate room, but...
Yeah. He hides God inside the individual self, deep inside. God becomes this fierce, active, striving moral law at the core of our being. It's patriotic, it's passionate, and it's completely immune to external attack.
But that intensity is what gets him into trouble, right? The famous atheism dispute.
Exactly. The irony is staggering. He was trying to save God by making him intensely personal, but his style was just so provocative. He refused to back down, and the nervous authorities saw a revolutionary, not a defender of the faith. He got exiled for his attitude, not his atheism.
So the country house was too passive, the underground shelter was too intense. Which brings us to Schelling.
Schelling tries the hidden cave. His idea was to hide God deep inside nature itself, not in reason, not in the self, but in the dark, chaotic, mysterious roots of the world, a sort of mystical natural force.
And Hegel looks at this and says, no.
He says, absolutely not. He was terrified that if you hide God that well, he'll just dissolve. He'll become another mysterious force that science will eventually explain away. That's when he made his famous crack about Schelling's philosophy being the night in which all the cows look black.
It's all just one big mystery. So if isolation fails, and internalization fails, and hiding in nature fails, Hegel concludes there's only one option left.
Total enclosure. He realized you couldn't evade the enemy. You had to build an armored fortress around God, the ultimate system. He had to put himself at the top as the architect, not out of arrogance, but to make sure nobody could come along later and add a window or knock down a wall.
Okay, but every fortress has a weak spot. And for Hegel, that was his philosophy of nature. The part dealing with science, our sources say it was, well, pretty bad.
It was objectively weak. Compared to the real science of his day, it was outdated, often just plain wrong.
So why include it? Why risk the whole project on a section he clearly wasn't an expert in?
He had to. He absolutely had to. Because in his theological blueprint, that section was the incarnation. It was the sun, the earthly city. Without it, the whole Trinitarian structure he built his defense on just collapses.
Wait, you're saying he knew it was weak, and that was part of the plan? That seems incredibly risky.
That's the most brilliant and counterintuitive part of his entire strategy. The weakness wasn't a flaw. Paradoxically, it was a feature.
How could bad science be a feature?
Think about it. If his philosophy of nature had been scientifically accurate and powerful, what would have happened?
I guess modern science would have embraced it.
Exactly. It would have become independent. It would have stood on its own, broken free from his system, and destroyed the very theology it was supposed to be a part of. Its poor quality was a strategic louche. It kept empirical science subordinated to philosophy. It ensured the enemy could never occupy that part of the fortress and turn its guns inward.
It's unbelievable. A system this abstract, this dense, on purpose. Yet Hegel himself was a hugely popular professor. Packed lecture halls. How do you square that circle?
You have to separate the writing from the lectures. The writing was the fortress blueprint. Dense, armored, unchangeable. That was for posterity.
But the lectures, that was the sales pitch.
Precisely. In person, he was apparently mesmerizing. He used clear examples, and this is critical. He used these beautiful, romantic, literary phrases. Lines like, "The owl of Minerva flies only at dusk."
That's not abstract logic, that's poetry.
It's poetry. He was giving them a grand map of meaning in a chaotic time. He was satisfying that deep German need for both intellectual rigor and spiritual fulfillment. He was giving them philosophy that felt like theology.
So the whole time, his real project wasn't the triumph of reason over faith, it was the smuggling of faith across the border into the modern world, disguised in the language of reason.
He was the ultimate smuggler of theology, and the whole project, from Kant to Hegel, was like a group of mages casting layers of a protective shield. Hegel just realized he needed the biggest, most complex shield of all.
So what were the final spells he used to lock the fortress down?
It was basically a three-part spell. First, Protego Maxima, the maximum shield. That's the logic. Putting God or absolute spirit in a place so abstract that empirical science can't touch it.
Okay, spell number 2.
Fianto Duri. Harden the structure. That's the closed system, the prime number defense. It makes the fortress impossible to update or break into from the outside.
And the final spell, the one dealing with that weak science section.
Repello inimicum. Repel the enemy. That's the flawed philosophy of nature, which keeps hostile forces like empirical science pushed back, always subordinated to the grander philosophical and theological mission.
An incredible, multi-layered philosophical siege defense designed to last forever. And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to think about. If German idealism was the last great attempt to save God from modernity by hiding him inside this perfect philosophical fortress, what happened when that fortress finally came crashing down in the 20th century? What does the demolition of Hegel's grand defense mean for the fate of all modern thought that came after?
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.